The most dangerous thing you can do to a dream is introduce it to reality too soon. Not because reality is wrong, but because reality only speaks in the present tense. And a dream, by definition, lives in the future. The moment you allow the facts of what currently exists to govern the possibility of what could exist, you have already begun to lose. Not to the world, to yourself, to the voice inside you that quietly learned to ask permission before it dared to want anything. What if I told you that some of the most transformative people who ever lived, the builders, the visionaries, the ones whose names we still speak, were not, by any reasonable standard, operating rationally? That they held beliefs which, at the time, had no support, no precedent, and no logical foundation? That the thing which separated them from everyone else was not superior intelligence or superior resources, but a particular quality of conviction, a willingness to appear utterly unreasonable in service of something they could not yet prove. This is not an invitation to chaos. It is an invitation to a different kind of courage. The kind that has no audience. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply continues, quietly, stubbornly, and without apology, long after the reasonable people have stopped. Before we go further, if this is the kind of thinking that interests you, the kind that moves slowly and cuts deep, subscribe to Stoic Mindset. We don't make noise here, we make sense. Hit the subscribe button and join a community of people who are done being ordinary. Now, back to the idea. The problem with pure logic. Aristotle, one of the most systematically rational minds in human history, drew a distinction that most people who quote him tend to overlook. He did not say that reason alone was sufficient for a good life. He said that the highest human function was the exercise of the soul in accordance with virtue. And virtue, for Aristotle, was never a purely intellectual event. It was a practice. It required action. It required risk. It required at times the willingness to move forward without complete information. His concept of phronesis, practical wisdom, was precisely the intelligence that knows when calculation serves you and when it stops you. It is not the elimination of reason. It is the wisdom to recognize reason's limits. And reason has limits, profound ones. The logical mind is extraordinary at evaluating what already exists. It can compare, measure, predict based on prior data, but it has no instrument for measuring what has never been attempted. It has no calibration for the unprecedented. When you bring a truly original vision to the court of pure logic, logic will almost always rule against it, because it has no evidence in its favor, only evidence of everything that came before and fell short. This is the trap. Not stupidity, not laziness. The trap is intelligence applied too early, too completely, to something that is not yet finished being born. Heraclitus, the philosopher of flux and fire, wrote that you cannot step into the same river twice. Everything changes. Everything is in process. The world is not a fixed thing awaiting your correct interpretation. It is a moving thing, and the person who waits for the current to stabilize before entering the water will wait forever. Heraclitus understood that reality is not a destination, it is a direction. And to move in a direction, you do not need certainty. You need orientation and the will to move. The person who applies maximum logic to minimum evidence will always conclude, "Not yet." And not yet, repeated long enough, becomes never. Not through malice, through mathematics. The role of delusion in greatness. Plato wrote about a phenomenon he called divine madness, and he did not mean it as a criticism. He described it as a gift, a state in which the person is possessed, not by chaos, but by something larger than their current understanding of themselves. The poet who writes beyond what they consciously know. The lover who sees in another person a beauty the world hasn't validated yet. The philosopher who pursues a truth that no one else has confirmed is there. Plato's point, and it is a subtle, generous point, is that the highest human achievements do not come from the part of us that is careful. They come from the part of us that is called, that feels with a certainty that predates evidence that there is something worth moving toward, something worth becoming, something worth the cost. We have domesticated that idea almost entirely. We have replaced divine madness with 5-year plans and risk assessments, and the approval of people who have no investment in our vision and no imagination of our capacity. And in doing so, we have become very safe and very ordinary. Reframe the word delusion for a moment. Strip it of its clinical connotation and look at what it actually describes. Belief beyond current evidence. That is all. Belief that extends past what can presently be proven. And ask yourself, what extraordinary thing was ever accomplished without exactly that? What building was built? What art was made? What movement was started? By someone who first waited for proof that it could be done? The proof is always on the other side of the attempt. The evidence accumulates after the fact. The person who waits for certainty before beginning is waiting for something that only becomes available to those who already began without it. The fool's advantage. There is a place a fool can reach that the calm and logical man never will. Consider what that statement actually contains. Socrates, the man widely regarded as the wisest in Athens, said something that still unsettles careful thinkers, that the beginning of wisdom is the knowledge of your own ignorance. He was not being modest. He was making a structural argument. The person who believes they already know the shape of a thing will stop exploring it the moment their current map runs out. The person who knows they don't know, who holds their understanding loosely, with curiosity rather than conclusion, will keep going past the edge of the map into territory that the confident have already decided doesn't exist. The fool, in this tradition, is not stupid. The fool is unencumbered. The fool has not been adequately briefed on why the thing cannot be done. The fool does not carry the weight of consensus. And because of that, the fool moves through spaces that the credentialed, the experienced, the cautious, spaces that all of those people have quietly agreed to leave alone. Every field has its inherited wisdom about what is possible. Every industry has its unspoken ceiling. Every community has its spoken and unspoken limits on ambition. What is realistic? What is appropriate? What is permitted for a person like you? These ceilings are not laws of nature. They are the accumulated conclusions of people who stopped. And they pass those conclusions down, generation by generation, as though they were facts rather than choices. The person who does not inherit those conclusions, or who inherits them and decides with full awareness to discard them, has access to possibilities that the careful, the informed, the experienced have already ruled out. That is the fool's advantage, not ignorance, freedom. Pythagoras believed that number, pure relationship, pure pattern, was the underlying structure of reality. He pursued that idea to what seemed, to his contemporaries, like obsessive, unreasonable extremes. He built an entire philosophical community around it. He was mocked. He was exiled. The idea was considered absurd. Millennia later, his intuition turned out to be one of the foundational insights of mathematics and physics. He was not wrong. He was early. And early, from the outside, looks exactly like wrong. The danger of too much awareness. Too much light can blind. Plato's allegory of the cave is usually read as a story about enlightenment, the journey from darkness into light. But there is a detail in that allegory that is almost never discussed. When the prisoner is dragged from the cave into the sunlight, his first experience is not clarity. It is pain. The light blinds him. He cannot see. He wants to go back. This is not incidental. It is the point. There is a stage in every genuine pursuit where awareness becomes a weapon against you, where you can see yourself too clearly, see the gap between where you are and where you intend to be with such merciless accuracy that continuing feels absurd, where you can hear every possible criticism before it has been voiced, feel every possible failure before it has arrived. This is not wisdom. This is exposure without protection, and it stops more people than failure ever has. Aristotle wrote about akrasia, the state of acting against one's own better judgment. We usually apply that term to weakness, to indulgence, but there is another form of akrasia that is far more common and far less discussed. The state of knowing what you should do, wanting to do it, being capable of doing it, and still not doing it because the hyper-awareness of risk has paralyzed the will. The most self-conscious person in the room is rarely the most effective, not because self-awareness is useless, it is essential, but because there is a frequency of it that begins to operate as noise rather than signal. When you are watching yourself too closely, editing yourself too aggressively, running too many simultaneous simulations of how this will appear to others, you cannot act cleanly. You cannot commit fully. You are always half in the attempt and half outside it, watching, judging, preemptively retreating. The painters of ancient Greece understood this. There is a story about Apelles, the great court painter of Alexander, that his rivals would spy on his work in progress and report back that it looked unfinished, strange, not quite right. Apelles continued. The unfinished thing became the masterpiece. The critics were evaluating a process they mistook for a product. You are always in the middle of something great, unfinished. The question is whether you are capable of tolerating that, whether you can hold the discomfort of looking incomplete without abandoning the work. The philosophical correction. And here the wisdom of Aristotle returns, not as a constraint, but as a sharpening tool. Aristotle's doctrine of the mean is often misunderstood as a philosophy of moderation, of doing things halfway, of compromise. That is not what it teaches. The mean is not the midpoint between two extremes. It is the precise point of excellence. And that point is different for every person, in every context, at every stage of development. For the person who has been paralyzed by caution, the virtuous action leans toward boldness. For the person acting from chaos, it leans toward discipline. What this means in practice is this. The correction for overcaution is not recklessness. It is calibrated boldness, the kind that has roots, the kind that knows why it is doing what it is doing, that can distinguish between a vision worth holding and a fantasy worth releasing, that acts with full force but not without direction. There is a critical difference between the person who pursues an impossible dream from a place of unexamined impulse, running from something, escaping rather than building, chasing a feeling rather than a purpose, and the person who holds the same impossible dream from a place of deep, deliberate conviction. On the surface, they may look identical. Both appear unreasonable to the outside observer, but the interior is entirely different. One is driven by what they are avoiding, the other is drawn by what they are building. Plato distinguished between eros, that is disordered, desire without direction, hunger without nourishment, and eros, that is ascending, love, longing, pursuit that moves toward something higher. The same energy, differently oriented. The difference is not the intensity of the desire. It is the quality of the vision it is attached to. Your conviction must be attached to something real. Real in the sense that it reflects your deepest understanding of what you are capable of, what you are called to, what would constitute a fully inhabited life. Not what others have approved for you, not what the evidence currently supports, but what you know, in the part of yourself that is quiet and clear and beyond the noise of fear. What you know is possible. Practical application. What does this look like? Not in philosophy, but in a day. It looks like acting on the vision before the vision is validated, not announcing it, not explaining it, not defending it to anyone who hasn't asked, simply building it, quietly, with the seriousness of someone who already knows it will exist. Heraclitus taught that the hidden harmony is more powerful than the visible one. Let your conviction be the hidden harmony. Let the work be the only announcement. It looks like developing what Aristotle called megalopsychia, greatness of soul, the quality of taking yourself seriously enough to match the size of your ambition with the size of your effort. Not arrogance, not grandiosity, but a refusal to be smaller than you actually are, a refusal to edit yourself down to the comfortable size that others have decided is appropriate. It looks like learning to distinguish between the opinions that deserve weight and the opinions that do not. Not every criticism is useful. Not every voice in the room has earned the right to shape your direction. Socrates spent his life being interrogated by people who believed they were wiser than they were. He did not become hostile. He became discerning. He learned to ask, does this person know what they are talking about? Have they done the thing they are advising me about? Do they have any genuine investment in my becoming what I am capable of becoming? If not, and usually not, the opinion returns to the silence it came from. And it looks like maintaining the vision through the long middle, not the beginning, which is energized by novelty, not the end, which is sustained by proximity to completion. The long middle, where the work is hard, the results are still invisible, the original excitement has faded, and nothing external yet confirms that you were right. This is where most people quietly turn around and call it wisdom. It is not wisdom. It is fatigue, which is a very different thing. The ancient Pythagoreans had a concept of ascesis, disciplined practice, not suffering for its own sake, but the deliberate, sustained repetition of right action in service of a larger becoming. The person you need to become in order to do the thing you are attempting. That person is built in the long middle. Not revealed, built. Reflection. Plato wrote that the unexamined life is not worth living, but there is a companion truth that he implied and never quite stated directly. The over-examined life is not worth starting. At some point, the examination must end. The calculation must close. The internal debate must reach its natural conclusion, not because all the questions have been answered, but because you have finally decided that the answers are no longer the point. The point is the attempt. The point is the full expenditure of your capacity on something that matters enough to risk everything on. The people who changed the world, who built things, made things, became things that seemed impossible from where they started, were not different from you in their access to certainty. They had none. They were not different in their immunity to doubt. They had plenty. The only difference, the one that mattered, the one that cannot be faked or borrowed or inherited, was that they decided, not that they would try, not that they would see how it went, that they would do the thing, that the vision was real enough to organize a life around, even before the world confirmed it, even before the results appeared, even before anyone else understood what they were doing or why. Heraclitus said that the river moves, that everything you see is already in the process of becoming something else. The man who waits on the riverbank for the current to slow will stand there until the river has carried everything past him that it ever had to offer. Get in the river. Not when it is safe, not when the conditions are right, not when you have finally convinced the logical part of yourself that the attempt makes sense. Now, with what you have, with the understanding you currently carry and the vision you cannot yet explain. Because greatness does not begin in certainty. It never has. It begins where approval ends, where explanation becomes impossible, where the only thing left, the only honest thing, is to act as though the dream is already inevitable, and then to do the work that makes it so.